Welcome, dearly beloved anointed ones. If they have to lie about you to be liked, then the truth about you must be dangerously powerful. Let that settle in, because here's the cold, scandalous truth. Over 65% of people admit they've believed a rumor about someone before ever meeting them. But here you are, shattering every myth simply by walking into a room. They thought their slander was permanent. They thought their lies would become your legacy. But the joke's on them. You're still rising, and now everyone's watching the liars sweat. This isn't just about gossip. This is about a divine reversal. They manufactured an image of you that fit their fears. But what's terrifying now is this. You turned out to be the complete opposite, and the truth is more beautiful, more powerful, and more unshakable than they ever imagined. So buckle up, because in this video, we're about to peel back the layers of every false label they tried to wrap around your name. We're exposing the switch, the great spiritual plot twist, where the villain turns out to be the healed one, and the righteous ones are now choking on their own masks. And if you're wondering whether they're nervous that people are starting to see through the smoke, oh, they're not nervous, they're panicking. Let's get into it. Number one, they spent years defining you by their own rotting reflection. They spent years defining you by their own rotting reflection. When they looked at you, they didn't see you. They saw what they were trying to hide in themselves. And instead of healing it, they painted it onto your name. Everything they accused you of, every cruel label, every twisted story wasn't your truth. It was their guilt, their envy, their spiritual decay dressed up in your face. People like that don't operate from reality, they operate from projection. You reminded them of the parts of themselves they buried and never wanted anyone else to see. Your kindness made them feel fake. Your strength reminded them how weak they really were. Your honesty, that shook their performance. And because they couldn't handle that reflection, they did what cowards do. They deflected it back onto you and tried to make you the monster. They told others you were dangerous, unstable, untrustworthy, not because you were, but because they feared people would love you once they knew the real you. So they rushed ahead and built a version of you based on their bitterness. It was a race against your glow-up, your healing, your truth getting out. They slandered you preemptively like criminals hiding evidence. The real reason they kept your name in their mouth was because your presence alone exposed their lies. You didn't even have to do anything. Just being you was enough to make them uncomfortable. The sad part, some people actually believed them for a while. Because when someone tells a lie with enough emotion, people confuse it for sincerity. But time has a funny way of exposing the real one. Your consistency, your growth, your peace. It's all starting to speak for itself. And now those same people who swallowed the lie are starting to feel sick, because the truth tastes different. You were never what they said. You were just the easiest target for people who couldn't face their own shadows. They needed a villain, and you were the easiest to frame because you had a light they couldn't explain. But now people are starting to see. They're realizing that the villain story was projection all along. And the person they were warned about was actually the one who needed protection. Number two, they had to demonize you because your existence made them feel unholy. They had to demonize you because your presence made them feel unholy. You didn't come into their life trying to expose anything, but you did. Just by being who you are. Your spirit was too pure, too honest, too grounded. And people like that who've gotten used to performing, pretending, and playing dirty behind closed doors can't stand someone who walks in without a mask. You triggered something in them. Not because you were trying to be better than them, but because you weren't trying to be like them. You didn't gossip. You didn't chase validation. You weren't obsessed with being seen. But the irony is, everyone noticed you. That alone irritated them, the way you carried peace, the way your silence exposed noise, the way you held your head high even after what you'd been through. It made them squirm, because it forced them to look at themselves. You weren't just a person to them, you became a reminder of everything they weren't, of everything they buried, of the integrity they sold to belong to crowds who would never love them fully. So, instead of changing, they chose the lazy route. They decided you were the problem. It was easier to label you fake than to admit you were real. Easier to call you evil than to face their own bad intentions. Easier to call you dramatic than admit they're desensitized to pain. You weren't dramatic. They were just too numb to feel the truth you carried. They threw shade at your kindness, twisted your silence into arrogance, made your strength look like pride. But deep down, they knew what they were doing. It was never about who you were, it was about what your spirit exposed. They could have asked you to show them how to heal, but pride doesn't let broken people ask for help. So instead, they built a fake image of you to make themselves feel more righteous. And the most painful part, some of them actually convinced themselves that you were who they said you were. But the truth is surfacing now, because no matter how many lies they told, one thing never changed. Your character stayed solid. And now, even the ones who once doubted are realizing the reason they hated you was never about you. It was about the parts of themselves they couldn't stand. Number 3, they preached that you were too much, because you refused to be less for their comfort. They kept saying you were too much, too loud, too emotional, too deep, too intense. But the truth is, you weren't too much. You were just too real for people who built their entire personality around pretending. The moment you showed up as your full self, it shook the room. Not because you were being extra, but because most of them were used to people who watered themselves down just to be accepted. You didn't do that. You didn't play small, and that offended them. They weren't prepared for someone who didn't need a filter to be powerful, someone who didn't wait for permission to speak truth. You didn't shrink in order to make others feel comfortable. And that alone was enough to get you labeled difficult. But being difficult in their eyes just meant you couldn't be controlled. You had boundaries, standards, vision. You questioned things instead of following the crowd, and that made you threatening. People who have gotten used to fake peace and shallow conversation don't know what to do with someone who brings real depth. You felt too raw for them, too honest, too alive. So instead of admitting they weren't ready for that kind of presence, they tried to make you feel ashamed of it. They tried to convince you to quiet down, tone it down, calm down. But none of it was really about you being too much. It was about them being too little in the areas that mattered. What really shook them was that you were unapologetic. You didn't play the victim, but you also didn't let them bully you into submission. And when they couldn't mold you into their idea of acceptable, they started calling you names: dramatic, problematic, extra. But those words weren't honest descriptions. They were desperate attempts to manage their own insecurity in your presence. Over time, people are starting to see that now. They're realizing you weren't the problem. You were just the first one to stop pretending, the first one to break the pattern. And now, those same people who said you were too much are secretly wishing they had even half your courage, because deep down, they know the truth. You weren't too much. You were just too authentic to be controlled. Number 4, your reputation was their sacrifice to the god of control. They used your name as a sacrifice to protect their own image. Your reputation became the offering they threw on the altar just to keep their illusion of control alive. They knew that as long as people were focused on you, no one would look too closely at them. So they fed lies to the crowd like it was holy truth, and sadly, people ate it up without question. It was never about what you actually did. It was about what they needed you to look like. In their story, you had to be the villain so they could be the victim. They twisted events, exaggerated emotions, and told half-truths that became full-blown stories. Every rumor was another ritual to keep their ego alive. They didn't just want to be right. They wanted to be worshipped. They wanted people to praise them for surviving the very chaos they created. Your name became their scapegoat. They pinned their shame, their guilt, and their insecurity onto you like a criminal pinned evidence. And the more they felt out of control in their own life, the more obsessed they became with controlling how you were seen. They dressed their lies in concern. They disguised their jealousy as warnings. They covered their cruelty in charm, all while making sure your truth was buried deep beneath the noise. But here is the part they never expected. Truth doesn't die. It might go silent for a while, it might get buried, it might even get mocked. But it always comes back. Truth has a resurrection clause. And now the same people who once believed the lies are starting to question everything. The cracks in their performance are showing. The fake throne they sat on is wobbling. And you are rising. You are rising without needing revenge. You are rising without proving anything. Just by being consistent, just by walking in your peace, you're proving them wrong. And now the same crowd that watched you get dragged is witnessing something else. Your glow, your clarity, and the strength that came from everything they tried to kill in you. They sacrificed your reputation, but they underestimated your spirit. Number 5, they didn't break you. They accidentally built the blueprint for your ascension. They really thought it would break you. They believed the pressure, the betrayal, the humiliation would crush you for good. That was the goal, to silence you, to shame you into submission, to watch you unravel so they could say, "See, we told you they were unstable." But here's the part they never planned for. You didn't break, you built. They thought the pain would destroy you. But you turned every hit into strategy, every loss into wisdom, every rejection into redirection. You took what was meant to bury you and turned it into bricks. Layer by layer, you stacked everything they threw at you and made it your foundation. You didn't just survive the storm, you studied it, you learned its pattern. You learned who was real, who folded, who smiled in your face and stabbed you when you turned. And instead of becoming bitter, you became brilliant. They thought you'd drown in the chaos, but you learned how to breathe underwater. They didn't realize that some people come alive when pressure hits. You were one of them. And while they were busy trying to tear down your name, you were quietly rising with a stronger one. Everything they did to break your spirit actually refined your purpose. You didn't crumble, you evolved. Your growth became their confusion. How did you still have joy after all that? How were you still standing after being thrown under so many buses? They don't understand that some people aren't fueled by applause or validation. They're powered by purpose. And purpose doesn't fold under pressure. It multiplies in silence. That's what they accidentally gave you. The perfect environment to become unstoppable. You didn't just come out of the fire, you came out fireproof. Now the same voices that laughed at your pain are struggling to process your peace. They thought they were ending your story, but they accidentally helped write your next chapter. And this chapter? It's the one where you take your place, not as the victim, not as the villain, but as the version of yourself they never believed you'd become. The storm didn't destroy you, it revealed you. And number 6, they created a fictional villain, and the world just realized it was never you. They needed a villain to justify the way they treated you, so they created one. They didn't just lie about you, they wrote a whole storyline, a carefully crafted performance where you played the role of the problem. They exaggerated your flaws, twisted your words, and filled in the blanks with their own fears and fantasies. And because they were so emotionally convincing, people believed them. It felt real, but it wasn't. It was theater. And like all bad scripts, the plot eventually fell apart. At first it worked. People sided with them. You were painted as unstable, dramatic, selfish, arrogant, all depending on what role fit their narrative that day. They were the victim, the one who tried everything to love and support you. And you were the emotionally reckless tornado destroying their peace. They cried crocodile tears, made subtle jabs, and sprinkled passive-aggressive comments just loud enough to damage your name. But the act could only hold for so long, because while they were busy spinning stories, you were living. You weren't clapping back or performing, you were quiet, consistent, grounded. And that's what eventually broke the illusion. You didn't match the monster they described. You didn't have the venom. You didn't have the chaos. People started watching you for themselves. They started questioning what they were told. And that's when everything started to unravel. The same people who were quick to judge you started observing you. And the more they did, the more they realized, wait, this person is nothing like what we heard. You were calm, not reactive. You were honest, not harsh. You had boundaries, not bitterness. The lies started to collapse under the weight of your truth. And now the real mask is falling, but not from your face. It's falling off theirs. The world is starting to see who the real manipulator was, who stirred the drama, who played the victim while creating the pain. Your silence didn't prove them right. It gave the truth time to catch up. And now that it has, they're scrambling, because the villain they built so carefully has vanished, and all that's left is their own reflection staring back at them. Number 7, they laughed at your grief because it was the only time they felt power over you. They laughed when you were at your lowest. They whispered, mocked, and smirked while you were trying to survive moments that nearly broke your spirit. To them, your pain was entertainment. Your tears were proof that they had finally succeeded in knocking you down. That was the only time they felt powerful, when you looked like you had nothing left. They mistook your grief for defeat. your silence for surrender. They thought they had won. But what they couldn't see was what was happening beneath the surface. Your pain wasn't the end of you, it was the beginning of your transformation. That heartbreak, that loss, that deep spiritual collapse wasn't weakness. It was sacred, it was consecration. Something divine was happening in the background. Your suffering was pulling every false identity, every toxic tie, every shallow attachment right out of your life. It wasn't destruction, it was purification. They couldn't understand that because they've never gone that deep within themselves. They've never sat in their own grief without turning it into performance or manipulation. But you did. You didn't use your pain to control anyone. You let it break you open, not down. That kind of growth, it scares people. Because they know once you get through something like that, you'll never be the same. And they'll never be able to reach you again. That's why they celebrated when you were down. It was the only moment they felt superior. Your vulnerability reminded them of what they were avoiding in themselves, so instead of facing it, they mocked you for feeling it. But now you've healed, and they're confused, because they expected you to stay broken, bitter, or at best quiet. Instead, you got wiser, softer in heart, sharper in spirit. You didn't lose your power, you refined it. They had a front row seat to your suffering, but they missed the part where you rebuilt yourself. And now that you've emerged, calmer, clearer, unbothered, they don't know what to do. The grief they laughed at was actually your rebirth. What looked like a breakdown was you being divinely rearranged. You weren't falling apart. You were falling into place, and they couldn't stop it then, and they can't stop it now. Number 8, you were the test, and they failed spectacularly in front of witnesses. You were never just a random target. You were the test, not for yourself, but for them. You showed up in their life carrying light, peace, honesty, and pure intentions. And how they treated you revealed exactly who they were beneath all the charm and performance. You didn't walk in demanding loyalty or attention. You simply existed as your true self. But that alone exposed their cracks. You triggered the parts of them they kept hidden, not because you did anything wrong, but because your spirit disrupted their carefully managed image. God did not look away. The spiritual realm was paying attention. While they were running smear campaigns and playing innocent, every move was being documented, not just by people, but by the spirit world. You weren't just a scapegoat. You were a divine audit, a mirror, a walking checkpoint that showed the real condition of their heart. And when the pressure came, they folded, they lied, they betrayed, they gossiped, they chose manipulation over maturity and cruelty over compassion, and they did it boldly with witnesses watching. They thought they were getting away with it. They thought they could play victim while throwing stones behind the scenes. But the test wasn't just about what they did in private. It was about what others would eventually see. Because even the ones who once believed them are waking up. The truth is leaking out through your calmness, your consistency, and your growth. People are starting to realize you passed the fire. You were tested in every way possible and did not lose your integrity. They, on the other hand, were playing with matches, dangerous, reckless, and arrogant, thinking fire would never catch up to them, but it has. Their lies are unraveling. Their fake innocence is wearing thin. And those same people who clapped when you were down are now watching you walk in purpose, while the ones who tried to bury you are stuck, explaining themselves. This was never just a season of betrayal. It was a divine setup to expose who was real and who was never built to walk with you in the first place. You were the test, and now everyone can see who failed, spectacularly. Number 9, they mocked what they didn't understand, and now they fear what they can't explain. They mocked you because they couldn't figure you out. You didn't fit into their boxes. You didn't follow their rules. You didn't move how they expected, and that irritated them. People fear what they cannot control, and instead of being curious about your depth, they ridiculed it. You were too calm, too intuitive, too different. And instead of trying to understand you, they made fun of you. They laughed at your quiet strength. They picked at your sensitivity. They downplayed your intuition like it was nonsense. But deep down they were unsettled, not by anything you did, but by the fact that you moved in a way they couldn't explain. You weren't performing, and that's what confused them. You didn't need a crowd to feel powerful. You didn't chase validation. Your confidence wasn't loud. It was rooted. You grew in silence. You healed privately. You evolved without asking for permission, and that's where their fear truly began. Because now you're no longer someone they can define, you're no longer someone they can laugh at or feel superior to. You became someone they cannot reach. Your growth exposed their stagnation, your progress highlighted their laziness. Your peace made their drama look childish, and now they're uncomfortable, not just with you, but with themselves. They watched you go through things that should have broken you. They saw the losses, the betrayals, the low moments, and still you rose, wiser, stronger, and untouched by bitterness. That kind of elevation terrifies people who rely on manipulation and performance to get ahead. They wanted you to stay at the level where they could laugh and feel safe. But now that you've elevated beyond their reach, the joke is gone, and all that's left is fear. Because they can't undo your evolution. They can't copy your process. They can't explain how you got here without mentioning the part where they tried to destroy you. And they especially can't accept that favor followed you anyway. You're living proof that favor doesn't come from faking it. It doesn't come from flattery or strategy. It comes from alignment. And they missed that. You were mocked, misunderstood, underestimated, and now you're unstoppable. And the people who once laughed, they're now watching in silence, unable to explain how you became what they swore you'd never be. Number 10, they can't erase what God engraved into your destiny. They tried everything to erase you. They removed your name from conversations, left you out of spaces you helped build, and acted like you never existed. They blocked blessings they couldn't control. They rewrote stories to make themselves look like the only reason anything worked, all because your presence started to expose how little they actually brought to the table. But what they failed to realize is that purpose can't be erased. Not by insecurity, not by gossip, not by calculated silence. You were never just chasing an opportunity, you were the opportunity. You carried ideas, solutions, peace, and presence, but they couldn't own you. And because they couldn't own you, they decided to erase you. In their mind, if they could just keep you quiet, just keep your name out of the room, then they'd be free from the reminder that they needed you more than they admitted. But it didn't work, because what God engraves cannot be wiped off by human hands. Purpose isn't a trend you can cancel. It's not ink you can smear. It's not a name you can delete from a group chat. Your destiny isn't tied to their approval, and your impact isn't defined by who mentions you. You were carved in spirit, long before they had the chance to edit the narrative. And now that you're walking in that truth, they're realizing that leaving you out didn't stop you from rising. In fact, you became louder without ever saying a word. Your life, your peace, your presence, it all speaks volumes now. You don't have to explain, argue, or prove anything. People are noticing. The shift is visible. The ones who tried to cut you out are watching from a distance while everything they said you couldn't do starts happening anyway. They thought your silence meant defeat, but it was preparation. And now, every door they slammed shut is being replaced by one you didn't even have to knock on. Because when God writes your name into something, it can't be erased, not by fear, not by jealousy, not by manipulation. You weren't removed, you were repositioned. And the irony, you were always too loud in spirit to ever be erased. Number 11, they told lies loudly, but now the truth echoes without effort. They told lies loudly because they needed the noise to cover up the truth. They wanted their version of the story to travel fast, so they told it with urgency, emotion, and just enough drama to get attention. They didn't care if it was accurate. They just wanted to speak first and speak loud. In their mind, if they said it with enough confidence, people wouldn't question it. And for a while, they were right. People listened, people believed, people judged. But lies have a short shelf life. Over time, they start to rot. They start to contradict themselves. They start to smell. And that's when the truth begins to rise. Not with chaos, not with arguments, but with consistency. The truth doesn't need a stage. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need to scream. It just needs time. And now time has spoken. You didn't clap back. You didn't play their game. You didn't chase people to explain yourself. And that silence, it wasn't weakness. It was strategy. It gave the truth room to breathe. It gave people space to observe. And now, without you having to say a word, everything they tried to bury is coming to light. People who once looked at you with suspicion are starting to see clearly. They're realizing the story didn't add up. They're noticing your peace, your growth, your stability. And it doesn't match the image that was painted of you. You're not the myth they created. You're the mirror. Your life reflects back everything they refuse to confront. You didn't have to fight to be seen. Your truth started speaking for itself. It walks into rooms before you do. It changes the atmosphere. And now the same people who spread lies about you are becoming uncomfortable in their own story because the plot is falling apart. They were loud, but you were right. And now that truth is echoing in conversations, in decisions, in outcomes. Not because you forced it, but because it was always there, waiting. The lie was temporary. Your truth is permanent. And it's not just being seen, it's being felt. Number 12, they weren't exposing you, they were exposing themselves through you. They thought they were exposing you, but every word they said revealed more about them than it ever did about you. The accusations, the backhanded comments, the so-called concerns, none of it came from truth. It came from insecurity. It came from a need to redirect attention away from their own shadows. What they called truth-telling was really a loud confession dressed up as warning, because everything they projected onto you was something they were secretly wrestling with inside themselves. When they said you were arrogant, it was because they could not understand how you had confidence without seeking their approval. When they said you were manipulative, it was because they had become experts at controlling perception and were terrified you might do the same, even though you never did. When they said you were fake, it was because your authenticity made their performance feel fragile. You were not who they made you out to be. You were just an easy target for their unresolved issues. What makes it worse is that they convinced themselves they were doing something noble. They masked their envy as just being honest. They hid their bitterness behind concern. But the truth is, if you had been anyone else, quieter, less grounded, more eager to please, they would have embraced you. The only reason they had so much to say was because your presence disrupted their comfort. You did not play the game, you did not chase validation, you simply existed in a way that made them feel exposed, and so they labeled you dangerous. But people are waking up. They're starting to see the pattern. The one who always points fingers, always criticizes, always stirs drama, that is rarely the one with clean hands. You were never the problem, you were the mirror. You reflected back everything they tried to hide, and in their panic they lashed out. Now the spotlight has shifted. People are connecting the dots. They are realizing that all those loud accusations were projections. All those dramatic breakdowns were fear-based performances. And the person they tried to expose has turned out to be the one with the most integrity. You were not their enemy. You were their mirror, and they could not handle the reflection. Number 13. They thought smearing you would preserve their power, but it triggered their collapse. They thought that smearing your name would keep them powerful, that dragging you through the mud would make them look cleaner, that if they could poison your reputation fast enough, people would never get the chance to see who you really are. They needed to make you look small before you had the chance to become who you were always meant to be. It was not just about control, it was about prevention. They feared your healing, they feared your clarity, they feared your evolution, so they acted first. They tried to trap you inside a version of yourself you had already outgrown. They spoke on your past like it was your present. They kept repeating old stories, half-truths and outright lies until they became tangled in their own narrative. Your name became their favorite tool, but also their biggest trap, because every time they opened their mouth to tear you down, they tied their credibility to the lie. And eventually the rope snapped. Now everything they built on that false foundation is falling apart. People are starting to realize the story never made sense. Too many contradictions. Too much hate with no real substance. The same ones who cheered them on are now side-eyeing their version of events. Because while they were busy obsessing over destroying your image, you were busy healing. Quietly, deeply, thoroughly. And that healing turned into something they were not ready for. Undeniable transformation. You were supposed to stay stuck. You were supposed to fall apart. You were supposed to go bitter or silent or disappear altogether. But instead you got stronger, wiser, lighter. And now you're standing in a version of yourself they never imagined you could reach. That is what's shaking them. Because the smear campaign did not block your purpose. It revealed it. Every lie they told has become the proof of how far they were willing to go just to stop what they could never control. Their downfall is not punishment, it is exposure. Exposure of the games, the jealousy, the manipulation. Their kingdom is crumbling not because of revenge, but because anything built on fear, lies, and ego will always collapse under the weight of truth. And now the only thing louder than their gossip is your growth. Number 14, you didn't just outlive their lies, you outshined their entire narrative. You didn't just survive the lies they told about you. You made those lies irrelevant. You kept living, kept growing, kept evolving, until everything they said no longer even made sense when people looked at you. Their version of you was supposed to be permanent. They thought once they planted the seed of doubt, it would grow into a forest that would keep you hidden forever. But it didn't. What grew instead was you. Bigger, bolder, and brighter than anything they ever expected. They worked hard to shape a narrative around your name. They told stories in whispers, created doubt in rooms you hadn't even stepped into yet, and tried to turn your identity into a cautionary tale. But now, those same rooms are seeing the truth. The real you walks in with presence, clarity, and peace. You don't match the warnings. You don't fit the script. And that's where the silence begins. Because people are realizing they were fed lies and the truth is standing right in front of them. Undeniable. The ones who once whispered now avoid your name altogether. Not because they've changed their mind, but because your existence exposes their role in the game. It is hard to keep pretending you believe the lie when the truth is glowing in your face. And even harder to admit that you played a part in it. That's the shame they now carry, not just for what they said, but for who they sided with. But here's what really shakes them. You didn't respond with revenge. You didn't clap back. You didn't go on a mission to clear your name. You just kept rising. And that is what destroyed their narrative completely, because they built their whole story on the assumption that you would stay down, stay broken, stay angry, but instead, you elevated, you outgrew the entire battlefield. They were prepared for a fight. They were not prepared for your evolution. They were ready for arguments, but not for your peace. And now your growth stands as a quiet but powerful contradiction to everything they tried to make people believe. The lie was loud, but your glow, it's louder and far more permanent. They wanted to define you, but ended up exposing themselves. They weaponized lies, but you weaponized growth. They tried to bury you in rumor, but all they did was plant the seed of your rise. This wasn't just a story of survival. This was a reversal. What they meant for destruction became the exact soil where your identity took root. Their manipulation was no match for your evolution. Their ego couldn't outlast your endurance. And while they scrambled to control the narrative, you were becoming something they could never predict, undeniable. You didn't need to prove anyone wrong, you just became right with yourself. That's the most dangerous thing you could have ever done in their eyes. Heal, rise, and keep shining without needing their permission. And now, you walk into rooms their lies can't enter. Your name holds a weight their gossip can't lift. The people who once doubted you are quietly shifting in their seats, realizing they misjudged someone who was sent to be a mirror, not a monster. They thought they had the final say. But your life, your peace, your presence, your progress has become the loudest and most permanent truth of all. Keep walking, you've already outgrown the noise. If this message lit a fire in your soul or confirmed what you already knew deep down, don't just keep it to yourself. Go ahead and like this video so the algorithm knows this truth matters. Drop a comment below and let us know how this resonated with your journey. Your words might be the exact confirmation someone else has been praying for. Share this with someone who's been lied on, underestimated, or pushed aside, because they need to know they're not crazy, they're called. And most importantly, hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications, because we're not just building a channel. We're building a movement, one that exposes lies, heals wounds, and sets the record straight with bold divine truth. Welcome to your tribe. And remember, the truth doesn't need permission to shine. Neither do you. God bless you.